Hello everyone, and welcome to the start of a new series, a series that I've been excited to start working on and record. Crafting is an aspect of Root that I find really interesting, and so I'm just here to talk about it. I'm going to talk about how I think you should approach crafting as every faction. I'm going to briefly discuss every card in the Exiles and Partisans deck with relation to that faction. Discuss if you should craft it, when you should craft it, if I think that it's worth crafting. I'm only doing the Exiles and Partisans deck because that's just generally what the Root player base uses. The base deck has some interesting crafts as well, but in general they're more straightforward, and people prefer playing with the EMP deck anyway, in general. So let's just get right into it. Starting with our initial workshop in our setup phase. So we're going to want to base the placement of our initial workshop on our starting hand. So if you start with a Root T, a great place to put your starting workshop is in a mouse clearing. If you start with a boot, rabbit clearing, you start with something like swap meat, rabbit clearing is really nice. We'll talk about more about the specific cards later, but the placement of your first workshop should always be based on what cards in your hand, not what cards you're hoping to draw, because there's obviously no guarantee that you will ever draw those cards throughout the course of the game. So you're going to want to go for what you can guarantee would give you a benefit that you have in your hand versus something that might give you a bigger benefit, but you also might never get the chance to craft it. And we're going to want to keep this first workshop in our back line. We're going to want to make it difficult for opponents to remove both of our workshops in one turn later in the game. So what's going to happen a lot in Cat games is you're going to place your second workshop pretty late, mid to late game, just as a little bit of extra points, because you get 2 victory points for spending only 1 wood to craft the workshop. And so sometimes if your opponents destroy that workshop, you can rebuild it again. 2 more points for 1 wood, and that's great. That's great value. But if they're smart, they'll try and destroy both workshops at once if they're going to destroy the workshops, so that you have to spend 2 actions to get those points, thus making it not really worth it. But that's getting more sort of into general Cat strategy than the actual crafting. But just try and keep that workshop on the back line. And in the standard setup, I would recommend avoiding placing your workshop and sawmill and recruiter in the clearing with the keep, just so that you can collapse in on that clearing later, and so that the keep is less appetizing for people to attack early in the game, because there will only be 1 point of cardboard in that clearing. Now in advanced setup, it's not possible to avoid placing a building in the clearing with the keep, but you do get the added benefit of having 2 cats starting that clearing with the keep. If you can start with your keep in the Lost City and place a workshop there, that's really great. Just make sure you're going to be able to defend it well and have a full hand for field hospitals. Any suit works in the Lost City, of course, for field hospitals, so you just want to make sure you have that full hand of cards. That's about all I'm going to do for talking about the more general Cat strategy stuff. I just thought that would be pertinent because we are talking about, of course, the Marquise's crafting pieces, which are workshops. And so now we should talk about opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain from other options when one option is chosen. In this case, say you have 2 recruiters on the board. Those recruiters generate 2 wood. You need 2 wood to build another sawmill. Another sawmill is going to generate you more wood on your next turn, which you can use to build another sawmill, getting more and more points. If you, say, built a workshop instead, with that 2, spending 1 wood of your 2 to build a workshop, then you don't have enough wood to build a sawmill on that same turn, which puts you behind in your tempo of your scoring. So more often than not, you're going to get 2 recruiters down on the board as fast as you can, and then you're just going to pound sawmills, just keep putting up sawmills, 1 a turn if possible. And so a lot of the time, it's recommended that you just stick with the 1 initial workshop and In order to build a second one with no opportunity cost, we're going to have to wait until at least the 5th turn of the game, and this is when placing that next sawmill is going to, it's going to be on a turn where you have 4 sawmills that generate 4 wood total, but the next sawmill only costs 3 wood, and then you can use that extra wood to build your second workshop. Now, there are a few cases where I would recommend building the second workshop earlier than that, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But just know that the opportunity cost of the second workshop is high. And so for this reason, the Marquise really appreciates cards that only cost 1 crafting piece, as opposed to those that cost 2 crafting pieces, because you're putting yourself behind in the scoring tempo by committing to this card. So it really, really has to make an impact on your game. And of course, there are, scenarios where if your board position is perfect, you could consider building that sawmill and then overworking and then using that additional wood to get that workshop down. But that means you wouldn't be recruiting unless you wanted to spend a bird card on it. It means you wouldn't be marching to stabilize your position. So like everything has to be going perfectly for you to consider that option. And then of course the opportunity cost of crafting bird cards. So if we're going to think about crafting bird cards, we have to think about what is this crafted effect or number of points worth to me versus the action I can get from spending that card on Hawks for Hire. So overall, I think crafting with the Marquise is a pretty interesting puzzle. And so I'm just going to start going through the cards and talking about them, starting with a few that I think are really good cards to have as a Marquise. There's like no reason I wouldn't craft this card if I have it in my starting hand. And the first one of those is League of Adventurous Mice. So once in daylight, League of Adventurous Mice allows us to exhaust an item in our crafted items box to take a move or initiate a battle. Now, of course, it is a move, not a march, so it's worth half a march action, but it's worth a whole battle action. And this is really nice because it gives us additional value anytime we craft an item. So we're getting those points, and then we're also getting another action. And moves and battles are of course great for the cats. They'd love to make more use of them, but we only get 3 a turn plus any bird cards we spend, so we need to prioritize our building. Cats are very action starved compared to a faction like the birds, the moles, the badgers. They start with 3 actions, and they just keep those same 3 actions throughout the whole course of the game. This card really synergizes well with Bags and Teas, because Bags and Teas both cost a single mouse, the same crafting cost as League of Adventurous Mice. So you could craft League of Adventurous Mice on your first turn, and then on your second turn craft a tea, or maybe the other way around, depending on... probably the other way around, assuming you have both those cards in your hand, because you could craft League of Adventurous Mice at the start of your daylight and then immediately use it because you're still in daylight to take advantage of that item. This also makes bird-suited item cards worth crafting. This is something that Nitro Rev mentions in his video about League of Adventurous Mice. Nitro Rev is doing a series called Let's Get Crafty, where he talks about has a video dedicated to every card in the Exiles and Partisans deck and talks about the merits of it for each faction and does a real deep dive into the card and covers interesting edge cases, all sorts of great stuff. I'll link his channel in the description if you are somehow watching me but haven't seen any of his videos. But yeah, he mentioned in his video about League of Adventurous Mice that this makes crafting item cards that are bird-suited action neutral. And what he meant by that term is that you're taking the action that would be used for Hawks for Hire, and you're now converting that into a League of Adventurous Mice action. So that's not as flexible, right? You don't have the opportunity to build with that. You don't have the opportunity to recruit with that, but you do get the point provided by those bird-suited items. I guess points. You could craft the bird-suited sword as well. And this card does, unfortunately, have a bit less utility when the Vagabond is in the game. That doesn't make it less worth crafting. It just means that you're going to have to be more... you're going to have to consider when you should craft your items more carefully. Because crafting a tea early in the game with the Vagabond, if they're a strong Vagabond, is inadvisable, but I think we all know why we shouldn't craft the good items for the vagabond. And we need to exhaust the item on the turn we craft it to guarantee that we'll get the value out of it, because if we don't, then the vagabond can simply aid us for that item before we ever get the chance to exhaust it for an action. And so yeah, League of Adventurous Mice, great card, no-brainer to craft if you're the Marquise. And I'm just realizing now I should have compiled how many copies of each card are in the deck. I know that there are 2 copies of this card, but I don't know off the top of my head how many copies there are of the other cards, so I'll be sure to do that for the next video, which is going to be on the Eerie. Next is Charm Offensive. This is a great card that allows us to, at the start of evening, draw a card and choose another player to score 1 point. So this card is going to help offset the card draw that we have as the Marquise, which is pretty much hard capped at 2 cards per turn. It's very rare that you're going to be building more than that 3rd recruiter that's just necessary to unlock that 2nd card draw, and then you're going to use those 3 recruiters to just get all your cats on the board. And from there you can rely on field hospitals to keep your cats on the board rather than recruit actions. And this card is interesting because it gives us a free card and we can use the point a little strategically. Of course, you can always just give it to the person in last place and hope that it doesn't come back to bite you, but you could also potentially incentivize the policing of another player rather than the policing of yourself, right? Giving them a few points over a few turns, and that, hey, all of a sudden, those birds are looking really scary. They have a lot of points, and maybe take the heat off of yourself a bit, and the rest of the table will focus their attention on that faction you've been feeding points to. And something that I thought was interesting is if you are playing a game with hirelings, you can give an extra point to tie a player for the lead before you give them that hireling. And that's relevant because when you roll for control of hirelings, you first check to see if you are the leading player or tied for lead, and that influences how many turns you will get to hold on to your hireling for. If you're in the lead, you can hold on to it for 1 to 2 turns. If you're trailing, you get to hold on to it for 2 to 4 turns, depending on what you roll. So yeah, I just thought that was an interesting way to have a direct impact on how long potentially a powerful hireling that you have to give away stays in a player's control. And this card really doesn't have a downside because you're not forced to activate it every turn and give a player a point. If you really don't want to give anyone a point, just don't activate Charm Offensive. Simple as that. But all the other times, it's just a nice way to increase that card draw, which is really nice for the cats because it'll help you have more cards for field hospitals. It'll give you more chance to draw those one crafting cost items that match your workshop, and it'll most importantly give you more chances to draw those bird cards, which are going to be critical for your end game. Swap Meet allows us to, once in Birdsong, take a random card from another player and then give them a card. And it's important to note that this card can be the same exact card that you just took, because it does say that you take a random card from another player and then give them a card. They're 2 separate parts of the same sequence. So yeah, that card can just be the same one if you don't like it. And this is great because we can just go fishing for bird cards. If there's a faction that you know has a bird card, say the otters have it for sale in their public hand, say the lizards just revealed it to take the sacrifice action, say the moles, if the moles reveal it, it gets discarded. So definitely not that. If the moles reveal it, you probably don't want to swap meet with the moles because they won't have a bird card for you. Yeah, so mostly if the otters or lizards show you that they have a bird card, then you can swap meet with them. And of course, anyone else you can swap meet too. If you suspect that the Eerie are holding on to a bird card to put in their decree at a later turn, anything like that. If you notice that the Woodland Alliance player is holding on to a card instead of mobilizing it, chances are it's likely a crafted item or an ambush. And if it's an ambush, there is, first of all, ambushes are always great to have, but if it's an ambush, there is a 2 out of 5 chance that it is a bird ambush, assuming no ambushes are accounted for. You could say, oh, there's a rabbit ambush in the decree, there's a mouse ambush in the discard pile, can't account for any other ambushes, but if this card is an ambush, that's a 2 out of 3 chance I'm drawing a bird card from the Woodland Alliance's hand. Assuming that I draw the ambush, because they'll have drawn 2 or 3 cards into their hand in their evening. But if you do draw the ambush, there's a 2 out of 3 chance that that ambush is a bird card. So it's great for fishing for bird cards. It gives us more options for taking advantage of field hospitals. We're going to be able to keep cards in our hands of all suits. You know, sometimes we just keep drawing mouse cards, or we just keep drawing fox cards, and we really need rabbit cards because our keep is in a rabbit clearing. Well, then we can swap meet and try and fish out a rabbit card and protect ourselves that way. This again helps us offset our middling card draw, not because we're getting more cards, but because we're getting a better selection, right? So say we only draw 2 cards and both of those cards are bad, you know, you don't want them at all. It's a rabbit dominance and doesn't match the keep, rabbit. Clearings are all the way on the other side of the board, you know, it's just bad cards, and it lets you replace that card with a potentially better one. So that's always nice. And again, there's no real downside to crafting this card. If you don't like the card, you can just give it right back. So I'd say this and Charm Offensive, if you start with them in your hand, both no-brainer bunny crafts. And the great thing about the starting bunny workshop is not only can you also get the boots, you can also get Charm Offensive later if you crafted Swap Meet, or Swap Meet later if you crafted Charm Offensive. And both of them together are pretty powerful for the cats. Bag and boot. So I am going to talk about the items real quick. I didn't want to start with the items because they're pretty straightforward and kind of boring, but I did think they warranted some discussion. There's not a ton to say about them, and this will largely be similar advice for all the factions, but I figured I should just go through it. So obviously the items allow you to score without wasting any actions, because your crafting phase is before the phase in which you take your 3 actions in daylight. And because they're 1 cost, they can be crafted with your starting workshop. And these cards are usually safe to craft even with the Vagabond in the game. So bag and boot, 1 cost and safe for the Vagabond, means that like anytime you draw them and you have that matching workshop, I would just go ahead and craft it. And if you have the choice, I would craft the suit that's worst for field hospitals. So for both of these cards, you have all 3 of the game suits and the bird suit available. Yes, I believe that's correct. All 3 of the suits and the bird suit available to craft. And then, of course, we do have the bird-suited bag and boot, like I just said. Those are probably not worth the craft unless you do have League of Adventurous Mice. Of course, it's situational, you know, but 1 point versus an entire extra action, it's up to you. If you really need that 1 extra point, go for it. It's situational. Generally, though, I'd say not worth it. Route T, best card art in the game, so that's important to note. And the Route T is 2 points that can be scored with the starting workshop without using any of your actions, same as all the other items. But this one's great because you get 2 points for 1 single crafting piece. So it's the best ratio of points to crafting pieces in the game, and it's highly efficient at scoring you points for little investment. But the drawback is that you usually do need to save it for the late game if the Vagabond's in the game. So that means if you're holding on to a T and the Woodland Alliance is in the game, that could potentially complicate things because you don't want to be forced to give up that T card if you don't have to, right? But where the sympathy is and your triggering of outrage could mess that up. And in games without the Vagabond, you could just craft it and be done with it, but the Vagabond can complicate things for you a bit. And again, you're going to want to craft the suit that's worst for field hospitals if you have a choice. Moving on to the coins. 3 points is 10% of a winning score, so great card to craft if you're able to craft it, but it does require you to invest in a second bunny workshop. You do have the potential to craft a second coins, which would be 6 points, 20% of the winning score earned for just building one extra workshop. Just thought I'd note that. And Vagabond does like coins, but the table isn't doomed if they get them. Not nearly as good for them as the Root T is. So, unless you're up against a Vagabond that you feel like could really abuse aiding you, and there's no way for you to turn them hostile against you, that would be the only reason I would consider not crafting the coins. But most times, if I have the ability to craft coins, I'm absolutely taking those 3 points. And again, suit that's worse for field hospitals. If you have a choice, go ahead and craft that one. Onto the crossbow. The crossbow is generally more useful for Vagabond than a single boot or bag, so keep that in mind. With the crossbow, you're using the fox crafting suit, so you could craft false orders with your starting workshop if it's in your hand, and hope to draw a crossbow later. I'm not sure the inverse is advisable, so if you're trying to decide, you have a crossbow in your hand and a mouse craft in your hand, maybe it's mouse partisans, maybe it's a T, and not a T, that's a bad example, because obviously you just take the T, unless the Vagabond's in the game, then maybe you'd consider. But if that other card is, say, League of Adventurous Mice, I would probably go with mouse. If it's false orders, though, that could be a different conversation. Not against League of Adventurous Mice, though. That card's just so good for cats. There are only mouse and bird suited crossbow cards in the deck, so that's something to be aware of, and that also means there's only 2 copies of crossbow in the deck. So if you have one there and you know where the other one is, then you can just hold on to this crossbow until you want to craft it for that 1 point burst. And then we come to the hammer. You're likely only crafting this one in non-Vagabond games. In games with the Vagabond, Fox is a less valuable crafting suit because all of the items give the Vagabond a pretty good benefit. Hammers and swords, huge benefit. Crossbow, marginally less, I'd say, but still good. And if it were my choice, I'd give none of them to the Vagabond, and I'd also give him a whack upside the head. You can hold on to this one all game because there's only one Anvil card. There are no other copies of Anvil in the deck. There's just the one. And so you can hold on to that for a late game 2 point burst, or you can craft it right away, whatever you think you need to do. And then sword. This is the worst return on investment from any of the item cards. Putting down that second Fox Workshop is only going to get you 1 additional point in crafting, as opposed to the coins, which get you 3 points for 2 crafting pieces. And like Hammer, you're probably only going to want to craft this in games without the Vagabond. There could be a slight offset in the investment because there's a potential you draw Uriamagre. Is that how you pronounce that? I have no idea. Or Informants. Maybe Informants. I just put Informants on there because it's the only other card that has 2 Fox crafting. Yeah. Okay, moving on. And then again, you're going to want to craft the suit that's worse for field hospitals if you have a choice. There is no rabbit-suited sword in the deck, and there is a bird-suited one in its place, but that one's almost certainly not worth the craft. No rabbits, just something to keep in mind. Thought I'd mention it. False orders. So in Birdsong, false orders allows us to discard the card to move half of an enemy's warriors rounded up from any clearing as if we were that player, ignoring rule. This is a really nice card to help us establish rule for building. If someone has a lot of warriors in a clearing that we want to build in, but we only have a few warriors, instead of taking a march, we can use false orders to rule that clearing without spending any of our actions. And it'll also make it easier to claim new building slots in clearings where there are none, because the defending warriors are going to get thinned out a lot when you move them out of the clearing. And then you can hopefully battle them away in one battle. Speaking of battling them away in one battle, partisan cards are going to help a lot with that. They're going to make your wasted battles way less frequent because you're getting that one extra hit. They're also a deterrent to any would-be attackers. Once you use partisans once between your turns as the defender, there's no reason not to keep using it over and over again. So it just makes your clearings just a little less appetizing to people hunting for cardboard points. Cats are going to end up discarding cards at the end of their turn a lot, in my experience, because you don't really need to spend cards too frequently outside of field hospitals, which some turns no one's going to attack you. And the only other cards you're really spending are bird cards, and then any one cost cards that match your starting workshop that you're just like, oh, well, I'm gonna probably end up discarding this anyway if I don't craft it, so might as well just craft it. So you end up discarding a lot at the end of your turn. So the discarding all of your cards except the suit that you have, it's not the biggest deal for cats compared to some other factions, but you should always spend your bird cards before activating the card, because all of your cards except, in this case, rabbits, reading rabbit partisans. Oh, I didn't read the card. Except rabbits, that would include birds, so you'd have to discard all fox, all mouse, all bird cards from your hand. So let's just read the card real quick since I forgot. In battle and rabbit clearings, you may deal one extra hit, then discard all of your cards except rabbits. And it is much better if you have the partisan suit that matches your keeps clearing. This is something that I didn't really consider until I watched Nitro Rev's video about the partisan cards, but it makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you have your keep in a mouse clearing, and then you get attacked in a rabbit clearing and you use rabbit partisans, the entire board now knows that there are no mouse and no bird cards in your hand, which means if someone attacks your keep, you will not be able to field hospital, which is a really big deal. So having the partisan card that matches the clearing with your keep is really good, because you can use it and still have field hospitals available as a defender. Yeah, so for that reason, you're going to end up using this as attacker a lot more than defender, unless it matches your keeps clearing. But yeah, great card. If I draw the one that matches my starting workshop, I'm definitely crafting it, just to have the ability to use it, and also to deny any other faction at the table the ability to use it. I didn't mention false orders. If I don't have any other great cards in my starting hand, but I do have false orders, absolutely I'm putting my starting workshop in Fox, getting false orders out. That's just a really nice threat to have looming over the table. No clearings are really well defended, quote unquote, with false orders in play, because someone can always activate it and move half of your warriors out of the clearing. Informants allows us to, in evening, if we would draw cards, we may instead take one ambush card from the discard pile. Now, this card, before I even go to the bulleted points I had, I wouldn't go Fox solely for the purposes of crafting informants, but if I did have Iriamagre already and I drew informants, I would definitely craft it, because if there is a bird ambush in the discard, we can always guarantee ourselves a bird card until the deck is, of course, reshuffled. But if you really need a bird card on your next turn, and you know that going in, rather than drawing two cards and having a decent chance of drawing a bird, we can guarantee ourselves a bird card and a bird ambush at that, and everyone will know you just drew a bird ambush, which makes you slightly less of an appealing target again. So it has the same crafting cost as Iriamagre, so you can just slap that into your crafted improvements after crafting that card. And you can safeguard next turn's battle if there's no bird ambush. If you're planning to battle somewhere, you could draw the corresponding ambush if you really need to. You're missing out on drawing potential item cards that craft with Fox, you're missing out on drawing your hammer, your sword, your crossbow every time you activate it. But the guaranteed bird card is better if you have a use for it. It's not like you're going to use it to just be like, okay, I'll have a bird card in my hand just in case, While that would be great to have, I'd rather get that card just by taking my 2 card draws for the turn, and then also having the chance of getting an item to craft. Master Engravers. Whenever you craft an item, score 1 extra point. So this card has a very high opportunity cost, like I was talking about earlier. No items cost 2 mouse crafting. So if you're building a second mouse workshop, it is explicitly to craft this card or Murine Broker. And I just don't think either of them are worth it. Because building more than 2 workshops to take advantage of the extra crafting points from Master Engravers is going to put you even further behind in Sawmill tempo. And the extra, couple extra points from crafting teas and bags are those points that you would have been scoring if you had kept on your Sawmill building pace, if that makes sense. Speaking of Murine Broker, whenever another player crafts an item, draw a card. Again, high opportunity cost because of the fact that no 2 items cost 2 mouse crafting pieces. And it shares its cost with Master Engravers. The potential for these extra cards, you can't control the frequency of when you get them because it's contingent on another player taking an action. And because of that, it's not really worth the loss in tempo, combining that with the bigger problem, which is the cost of 2 mouse workshops. It's not really worth the loss in tempo of building sawmills. Now, of course, if you have one of these 2 cards and you're going to be building that second workshop for points late in the game, why not make it a second mouse if you can? But other than that, that's the only time I'd consider crafting either of these cards. Tunnels. With tunnels, you treat clearings with any of your crafting pieces as adjacent. This is an interesting one. This is one that I always think can provide some use, and it rarely does. The only factions that I seem to find a lot of use for it are with Eerie and with Badgers. And, you can get some marginal use out of it with other factions. But those are the 2 that I really think that it's decently good for. And I'm just saying that because, I think it's an interesting card, but it never really turns out to be that great. So you can create a path from your back line to the middle of the board, which can be useful. And an interesting idea, if you do have tunnels, is to build a second workshop in the middle of the board and then use tunnels to abandon it, move those pieces back to your back line where your original workshop is, and then hopefully someone swoops in and takes that free cardboard, and then you can rebuild their next turn. Of course, this is not foolproof. There's a chance they just build over it. There's a chance they don't take the bait because they see you're trying to claim an extra easy 2 victory points for 1 wood. But it's an interesting idea. It's worth a shot. Of course, this does require the workshop to be your only building in that clearing that you're abandoning. But it was just an idea I had. But if you do start with a rabbit workshop, why not craft it? You're probably gonna discard this card in a couple turns anyway because you didn't end up using it for field hospitals. Like I was saying earlier, cats don't really have a ton of things to sink their cards into, so if you have the rabbit workshop, just go ahead and craft it. It might come in handy at the end of the game. Propaganda Bureau. Once in daylight, we can spend a card to remove an enemy warrior from a matching clearing and place a warrior there. This card is pretty much dead on arrival to the cats because it requires 3 workshops. It's almost never worth placing that 3rd workshop down on the board. So this card is pretty much never worth crafting because you're pretty much never going to have the opportunity to craft it. If you're playing with the Woodland Alliance, though, I would consider discarding other cards until the deck gets reshuffled, because this card is very powerful in their hands, and if you can delay discarding it until after the deck's reshuffled, you're delaying the time until that card potentially ends up in their hands. Boat Builders. So now we're getting into, I put all the bird cards in one section because we're going to be talking about the usefulness of the card versus the usefulness if it were spent for Hawks for Hire, right? So for Boat Builders, it allows us to simply treat rivers as paths using any 2 crafting pieces, which is nice because if we build a rabbit workshop, but our initial workshop was mouse, we now have access to crafting a couple extra items and a couple extra nice improvements, but we also do have the chance to craft Boat Builders. And like I just said, we have to weigh the potential benefits of this against the benefit of that 1 extra action that we would get from Hawks for Hire. This card, if it does give us access to new building slots when we have none in our territory or we're about to run out, it could be worthwhile. I'm imagining mostly the winter map where maybe your opponents have nailed down that choke point at the bottom of the map, and you aren't able to justify moving half of your warriors, across the map and leaving all your buildings so lightly defended to place that building. Now, of course, there are times where you want to abandon some buildings, some less important ones for them to get destroyed, but say you can't do that. Then you could consider crafting Boat Builders to move across the river and bypass that choke point entirely. This could also be interesting on the mountain map where the river only touches 3 clearings: the bottom left corner, the central clearing with the tower or the Lost City, when people play with that mountain map rule set, and the top right clearing. So it can allow you to get from one corner of the map to the other very quickly. If you have your keep in one of those corners, it could be particularly nice because you can, in one move, take those warriors that you field hospitaled and get them right back into the action at the center of the board. This also allows your wood to travel along the river because you're treating the river as a path. It's not just allowing you to move along the path, along the river. So this could unlock access to sawmills that were previously boxed out of a path to the build slot. So say, Erie rule the clearing on the left, Badgers rule the clearing on the right. Those are the only 2 connections, but the river goes through it. I don't know if there actually is a clearing like that. Yeah, there is on top of the autumn map, the top bunny clearing. Clearing on the left is ruled by someone else, clearing on the right is ruled by someone else. There's no real way for you on this turn to rule either of those clearings and get that wood out of there. You can craft Boat Builders, and now you have access to all that wood. Corvid Planners allows us to move ignoring rule for the same cost as Boat Builders, 2 of any crafting pieces. This Corvid art is also my favorite. This card is second on my favorite card art list behind the Foxroot Tea. This card's pretty niche for cats. I'm not sure I've ever even really considered crafting it because you still do need to rule the clearing that you're moving into in order to build there. So, it's great that you can ignore rule and maybe you can do some sneaky stuff, pick off a couple easy points of cardboard, and it could be like a niche idea where you get nearly board wiped at the end of the game and they box you into a couple clearings where your workshops are, and they're not really going to bother destroying those workshops because if they do, maybe you'd get some more points out of rebuilding them. and your wood, they're not sawmills obviously, so you don't have to worry about them as much. But then you pull out the corvid planners and you sneakily slip by and pick up the less cold points of the win. That's probably the only scenario I could see this being super useful for the cats. I definitely wouldn't plan on crafting it, especially because it's a bird card. Yeah, the other time is like if you really need to make it through a choke point, same as boat builders, it can be considered. But I think even less so than boat builders, because it doesn't have that additional utility of helping you with building, because boat builders allows you to move that wood along the river. This doesn't really give you any advantage in getting more buildings out on the board. And I was originally planning on just mixing all the cards throughout, but then I decided to put all the birds together and forgot to take these bullet points off, talking about weighing the benefits of the card against the benefit of Hawks for Hire. Yeah, I think this is just pretty much always Hawks for Hire. Yeah, and again, if playing with the Woodland Alliance, consider spending other bird cards on Hawks for Hire before this one until the deck is reshuffled, if you can manage it, because this is another card that is very powerful in the hands of the Woodland Alliance. You want to delay any chances that they have at this. You want to delay as long as possible. Saboteurs. At start of Birdsong, may discard this card to discard an enemy's crafted card. This is a great card, in my opinion. Not necessarily like for the Marquise or anything, but just for the game. They put some really crazy strong improvements in the ENP deck compared to the base deck, and I think Saboteurs is great for balancing that out. There are 3 copies of Saboteurs, which is nice. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. We're talking about the cats crafting Saboteurs right now. And sometimes opponents can craft a card that completely warps and changes the dynamic of the game. And then you, as the cats, now have a judgment call holding Saboteurs in your hand. Is the extra action that you would get from Hawks for Hire worth leaving that dangerous card in play? And just for a couple quick examples, Coffin Makers in general is a great card, but especially in a high aggression game, the holder of Coffin Makers is going to be racking up multiple passive points per turn, most likely, which is really, really dangerous. And then the Woodland Alliance with either Propaganda Bureau or Corvid Planners, like I just mentioned when we talked about both of those cards. Any strong crafting factions, especially the Otters with Master Engravers. I say the Otters specifically because they can use as many of their funds as they want on a turn to just keep drawing through the deck and trying to find those items to craft. And then Swap Me if another faction is targeting you for bird cards. So say the Erie have Swap Me and they know that the cats are likely going to be trying to hold on to a couple bird cards for the late game, and they say, well, I need a bird card, I'll just do a cheeky swap and hopefully grab one from them. The Badgers could do the same thing if they want it for their retinue. Those are probably the 2 biggest examples, I think. Yeah, those would be probably the 2 factions most likely to try and fish you for bird cards. So yeah, you can Saboteur that Swap Me, and really any other cards that you feel are gonna be used to harm you specifically and not someone else at the table. But those are just a few examples, and so I can't really. This one is just completely dependent on the state of the game and if you think it's going to be necessary. The other thing for Saboteurs is you can use it to safeguard a card that you've crafted. Like, say you craft Coffin Makers and you know someone's going to destroy that at the first chance they get. If you have Saboteurs, you can craft it the turn before, and then once you craft Coffin Makers, if anyone crafts Saboteurs, you can Saboteur their Saboteurs before they have a chance to use it on your Coffin Makers. So that's something to consider as well. And then, of course, if someone has Soup Kitchens, do I even need to explain this? Best card in the game, always going to want to Saboteur that, get it out before they ever have a chance to make use of it. Soup Kitchens. Your tokens now count toward rule, and each of your tokens count twice. It costs 1 of every type of crafting piece. Of course, I'm kidding about soup kitchens. The day someone wins a cat game with soup kitchens is the day I recognize them as the cat overlord, because why would you ever craft this card as the cats? It's kind of a shame because the effect could be useful if a sawmill is being camped, for example. I say for example, that was the one example I could come up with. If a sawmill is being camped, it's going to keep generating that wood per turn. So eventually maybe you'll rule it without having to move any pieces in there. Will it probably be destroyed so people can get the cardboard points before that? Yes, but I was trying to find a use for it. So work with me here, be generous. Yeah, the cost is just way too high, and it's a bird card. There's just no way ever that I see cats crafting this card. Always spend it on Hawks for Hire. I like, when I draw this card, I barely even register that it has an effect. I just see this lovely bird ladling out his soup and know that I can spend him for an extra action. So let's talk real quick about the second workshop. And what cards do I think are worth rushing a second workshop for? So when we're placing the second workshop, we want to put it in a place that threatens the table, right? And forces them to make a decision. So for example, if our initial workshop was in a bunny clearing, we can put our second workshop in bunny and then threaten to craft coffin makers and coins, or just one of them, any of them, great crafts, right? So now the table has to decide whether they destroy that workshop, which allows you to rebuild it for 2 victory points, or deny you those additional 2 rebuilding easy victory points to allow you to have the chance to craft those cards. And you might have them, you might not, right? You can, if you have no cards that you're planning on crafting and you're just doing this for points, still try and do it in a clearing that's going to threaten the table, right? Like I just said. And if you're going to do this, make sure that your initial workshop is well protected, because this strategy is not going to work if it's easy for the table to destroy both of your workshops in one turn. That's why I recommended putting your initial workshop in your back line, just so if you build that second workshop on the complete other edge of your territory, it's going to be very unlikely that the table is going to be willing to commit the resources and actions required to battling both of those workshops off the board. So which cards are worth building an early second workshop for? And you might have noticed I left a couple out of the discussion so far, and they are coffin makers. So whenever any warriors would return to a supply, place them on this card instead. At the start of Birdsong, you score 1 point per 5 warriors here, then return all warriors here to their supplies. Passive scoring. It's incredibly powerful, and the earlier you can craft this card, the better. Passive scoring is one of the reasons why the Eerie are such a powerful faction, and if we can get a little piece of that ourselves, why wouldn't we? The opportunity cost of rushing coffin makers early in the game is offset, first of all, by the passive points, but it's also offset by the potential to draw coins later in the game to get another easy 3 points. Ideally, you would craft Saboteurs the turn before you craft this card, but this decision is not always as clear-cut because maybe you really need that Saboteurs for Hawks for Hire. But I think it's worth a lot of the time not taking that action to get coffin makers just because it's such a good card. Yeah, I'm not sure how other people feel about this. Personally, whenever I have coffin makers, I just try and hold on to it on the off chance that I end up crafting it later. Or if the board looks like they're being nice to me, I'll try and rush crafting coffin makers. And if you cannot craft it yourself, consider discarding other cards until the deck is reshuffled, because this is another one of those cards you just don't want anyone else to have this. If you're not going to be able to craft it, you definitely don't want anyone else to be able to craft it, because it's just bad news. The only other card that I would rush a second workshop for is Eerie Amagray. At the end of Birdsong, take a move, then initiate a battle in the clearing that you moved into. If you did not take both actions, discard this card. So this is a bird card. It costs 2 fox crafting pieces. So if it is in your starting hand, rush 2 fox workshops. That's what I'd say. Put your initial workshop in fox, get that second one out. The earlier the better. That turn 1 is probably going to be the build overwork build with a sawmill and a recruiter, and then maybe the following turn you build a recruiter and you overwork to get that second fox workshop out, and then you're skipping out on recruiting again, so maybe not ideal. But if you have the bird card, a bird card that isn't this card, to get that recruit, that would be great. So yeah, it's not like 100% of the time if you have Iriyama-Gray, get 2 fox workshops on the board as fast as possible. But definitely I would be on the lookout for it and making an effort to do it, because the extra move in battle every single turn will more than make up for the tempo that is lost by not building a sawmill on a turn, for example, and for spending the bird card on something other than Hawks for Hire. If you can overwork and get it on the same turn that you do another build, great. If you can't do that, this is one of the only cards where I would say it might be worth the loss in tempo, and it probably is. Unfortunately, I play most of my games on digital, where Iriyama-Gray has a bug, and sometimes it just doesn't give you the option to use it at the start of Birdsong. So once I encountered that, I just stopped crafting it altogether, because I didn't want to risk crafting a bird card and then not being able to use the crafted effect for the rest of the game. So I will admit, I'm a lot of this is theoretical. I think I've only had the opportunity to craft Iriyama-Gray in one physical Cats game. But I mean, how can you go wrong with increasing the Cat's actions per turn from 3 to 5, right? Because you're getting that move and that battle, and then you're getting your 3 actions in Daylight. That's just a great card. And you can also get extra value from this second workshop that you use if you draw a sword later in the game, in the same way that you can draw coins later in the game with coffin makers and get some extra value out of that second bunny workshop. Actions that would be spent moving or battling can be used to overwork and get back on pace, because you're able to do those moves and battles as part of Iriyama-Gray and not part of your 3 actions. So yeah, that'll make up the loss of tempo, I think, fairly quickly, and then you'll get more value out of it. Just craft it as soon as you can. I just really like this card in general, not just for the Cats. I'm a big fan. The art's great, the effect's great. I really like it for lizards too. But yeah, we'll save that for the lizard video, I guess. And it gives Cats a lot more agency. I keep clicking this arrow key thinking that it's the end of my presentation, and it's not. There's just more bullet points. This definitely has to be the last one, though. Yeah, it gives Cats a lot more agency to affect the state of the board around them. A lot of times it would be great to do a few more moves and battle some people and police, but you're just not able to with only 3 actions a turn. But Iriyama-Gray makes a lot more options available to you as the Cats, which is really nice. I think that's it. Yeah, okay, that's everything. Thank you so much for listening if you made it to the end of this video. These are going to be rather long. I like to talk and just keep talking about this game because I love it so much, and I hope you do too. If you disagreed with anything I said, or if you agreed with anything I said, leave a comment, let me know, and we can talk about it. I am by no means claiming to be a root expert or a cat expert. Cats are one of my favorite factions to play, though, but I'm not claiming to be perfect at this game. I fully expect people to take issue with what I said, but this is this is hopefully going to help you learn, and then hopefully you can help me learn as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the Erie Dynasties Comprehensive Crafting Guide.